Hi there, everyone. It is 4 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez, in for Nicolle Wallace. Breaking news today on one of Donald Trump's most fiercely loyal allies in his administration. Trump has ousted his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, after growing increasingly disappointed with her job performance. Trump says Bondi will move into a job in the private sector and that Deputy AG Todd Blanche will now serve as the acting AG. This news comes on day 34 of an unpopular war of choice, an unhinged Oval Office address, a public clamoring for the release of the Epstein files, 8 million Americans taking to the streets to express their discontent with this president. But the president's focus? Ballrooms, loyalty tests, and retribution. Well, Bondi did everything she could during her time as the nation's top law enforcement officer to do Donald Trump's bidding. What tipped the scale, according to MSNOW's reporting, is that Trump grew, quote, frustrated with Bondi's inability to successfully prosecute several individuals whom he considers political enemies and has argued should face criminal charges. It is not that Bondi did not try to deliver Trump's revenge. When Trump directed her to prosecute his perceived enemies in a public Truth Social post back in September, she took her marching orders. But here's what happened to the most high-profile cases. There was the failed attempt to prosecute former FBI Director James Comey when the case was thrown out by a judge. There were 3 failed attempts to indict or prosecute New York Attorney General Letitia James. And a grand jury rejected an attempt to charge 6 sitting Democratic lawmakers. And then, of course, there was her handling of the Epstein files. As the New York Times reports, quote, Trump's support for Bondi has steadily eroded since last summer, when her early stumbles in managing the release of the Epstein files created a political liability for Mr. Trump among a segment of his supporters. Despite her ouster, the House Oversight Committee is vowing to still hold her accountable. Ranking member Robert Garcia saying this in a statement today, quote, Attorney General Pam Bondi has been leading a White House cover-up of the Epstein files. She has weaponized the Department of Justice to protect Donald Trump and put survivors in harm's way by exposing their identities. She will not escape accountability and remains legally obligated to appear before our committee under oath. She must answer for her mishandling of the Epstein files and the special treatment she has given Ghislaine Maxwell. As for who might replace Bondi on a more permanent basis, 3 sources familiar with the matter tell MSNOW that EPA Administrator, former Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, is on a short list. But it's not clear that any other person in that post can and will have more success with Bondi's failures. The second high-profile firing of a Trump cabinet official in less than a month is where we begin this hour. Our White House reporter, Laura Barron-Lopez, joins us from the North Lawn. Senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig is here. Plus, former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI, National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg is with us as well. Carol, talk us through how this all unfolded.
You know, what's been happening the last few days has been pretty interesting. We've been chasing this tip that Donald Trump had tired to the degree with Pam Bondi that he was going to remove her. And of course, last night we were reported, and again this morning, my colleagues on the White House team, Laura and Jake, were able to confirm that not only was he considering removing her, but he had informed Pam Bondi that he was removing her. I really like the way you began this segment because it's important to remember all the things Pam Bondi has done that set her completely apart from any prior attorney general. And that is her willingness to do exactly what Donald Trump sort of orders up in terms of prosecuting people or bringing charges against people that he views as his enemies. And none of those efforts thus far have been that successful. Grand juries have decided that they don't see the evidence for crimes on behalf of some of the people Donald Trump has targeted and Pam Bondi has willingly gone along with. And judges have actually intervened in cases where the evidence is also sorely, in their opinion, lacking. But really, the Epstein case is also a huge contributor to this, and we have to remember that Donald Trump lost supporters and friends and fans among, a dark conspiracy theory community that believed the Justice Department was hiding important information about Epstein and his special clients. Well, it turns out what the Department of Justice was mostly concealing, according to MSNOW, were documents that seemed to implicate or suggest that there were witnesses who claimed they had been sexually harmed by not just Epstein, but by Donald Trump. Those are the only documents we know of at this point that were withheld by this Justice Department for a period of time, and that did not help Donald Trump very much.
Laura, if all of this has been simmering for months now, why now? Talk to me about the timing.
Yeah, Alicia, I mean, I think that part of it was that the president was starting to really consider other people, and this had been building for so much time, all the way going back to last summer. He'd been hearing, as Carol laid out, for months from people that are close to him, from allies who come to the White House and talk to him, that they were not happy with Bondi's handling of the Epstein files and just her public persona. I think that a lot of it also had to do with some of her hearings, her public testimony recently to Congress, where the president wasn't necessarily happy with that as well. And, you know, of course, the president being a master of changing media narratives, there is some consideration that, you know, while the public is focused on Iran and rising gas prices, that things like this, shaking up his cabinet even further, could draw attention away from that. But ultimately, you know, there are people that the president is considering, and he had started to talk to over the last few days now, the Republicans and other allies that he was close to, about those potential replacements. And what one source familiar with the president's thinking told me was that when the president starts to do that, that means he's about to move on this. And really, within a matter of days, he did. And he was starting to talk to people about Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator, someone who he has been very happy with at the EPA, and with Zeldin carrying out his deregulation of many policies that would fight greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. He also is considering people like Jeanine Pirro, someone who is also incredibly close to the president, a very loyal supporter, who also denied the 2020 election results, like Pam Bondi. She's the current U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and Pirro, sources told me, as well as Jake Traylor, is pitching herself for the job, and is someone who is being considered for it as well. So there are a number of other people that we could go through that that sources have told me, Carol and others, that the president is considering, whether it's Alina Habba, who's the former U.S. attorney for New Jersey and was disqualified from that role by an appeals court, or also Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri, who is as well potentially on this short list here. Alicia.
It is interesting, Michael Feinberg, to imagine what those pitches must be, given that the president's discontent with his current attorney general was that she was not sufficiently loyal, that she was not able to bend an institution to her will. Regardless of who they put in that role, will they be able to carry out this president's agenda?
Not in the immediate future, and hopefully not ever, because the bulwark that has been blocking people like Pam Bondi from being successful in going after the president's foes is our judicial system. It is judges at the magistrate, district court, and appellate court level. It is grand juries. I would lightly disagree with you that she did not bend DOJ to her will. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, she didn't just bend it, she broke it. She has seen the largest outflow of talent from the Justice Department in United States history. Some of it has come from firings, some of it has come from resignations, and some of it has come from people who retired much earlier than they ever expected to because they couldn't take working in that environment. And she turned the Justice Department into the exact opposite of what it is supposed to be. She has let the innocent go free, whether it is individuals credibly charged with things like other Bush administration officials who are alleged to have taken bribes, or ICE officers who have killed Americans in city streets. And she has allowed the innocent to be punished, whether it's Letitia James or Jim Comey. We're in the upside down with what the Justice Department is supposed to be doing.
Michael Feinberg, you said Bush administration officials, but I think you meant Trump administration officials there. And I just no, and I want to clarify, Carol Leonnig, I agree. It is not my assessment that she has not succeeded in bending this institution to her will. It is the president's reading of the situation, that it has not been sufficient. What is the message then, Carol, to other loyalists? And as you are doing your own reporting, do you have a sense of the pitch that folks who want this job moving forward are now making to the president?
So perfectly described. What's happening here is Donald Trump is sending a signal loud and clear over the horizon and into the ears of the people who are, gunning for this job. And that is, it's not sufficient to be loyal to me. It's not sufficient to let the White House dictate who gets prosecuted. It's not sufficient to badger the heck out of members of Congress who are exercising oversight and deflect and avoid and filibuster so you don't answer their questions. Even though those are all things Donald Trump values, it's not sufficient. What will be sufficient is bringing sort of these scalps to, him at the Oval Office, the scalps of people that he wants to see pay those folks who are on his retribution list.
Laura, same question for you. Do you have a sense, as these folks are pitching themselves to the president, the types of promises that they are making?
We don't have just yet the details on specifically the way they're pitching themselves. But I think if you look at the list that we have, which sources have told us are on this short list for the president, all of them at some point questioned or denied the 2020 election, which we know has been a litmus test for this administration. They also are people who have been incredibly loyal. So the question is, which you posed, Alicia, is how successful can they honestly be in ways that Pam Bondi wasn't? Because, again, she brought cases. She attempted to prosecute the president's perceived enemies, but those failed. Jeanine Pirro herself also attempted to bring a case against those 6 Democratic lawmakers who issued that video telling soldiers that they didn't have to follow unlawful orders, and then she had to subsequently essentially drop that case. So she also has not been always the most successful. I think the question here is who is going to be Senate confirmable. They don't necessarily need Democratic votes to confirm one of these potential options. Jeanine Pirro did go through Senate confirmation, but that is something that I think they are going to have to make the case to the president, given the fact that not just with Pam Bondi, but also with DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, the 2 biggest exits from his administration here, from the cabinet level, it wasn't because they didn't go far enough. It wasn't because they weren't loyal enough or because they didn't attempt to do the president's bidding. Kristi Noem did carry out the harsh deportation policies that the president and those closest to him in the White House wanted. It was essentially because they couldn't go far enough. They couldn't execute it fast enough in the president's mind, and they also brought along some bad headlines along the way. And I think that it was the contribution of those bad headlines, be it about Epstein, but also not being able to fully carry out the president's bidding, and we hear the president just yesterday and repeatedly over the last few weeks, repeatedly referring to himself as potentially a king and saying that he wishes at times he were a king. And I think that that is what ultimately factors in here, is who is going to be able to carry out his bidding and to attempt to plow through the courts. And I think that whoever he ultimately nominates, and Carol can probably speak to this as well too, will be met in a similar fashion to the way Pam Bondi was met.
Okay, we're going to come back to that, but I want to talk about those bad headlines that Laura referenced, Michael Feinberg. With the Epstein case, let's remember what it was that Pam Bondi said at the start of her tenure.
One of the things that you alluded to, and this is something Donald Trump has talked about, the DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
I mean, it goes without saying this is going to be one of the most indelible moments of her tenure, Michael Feinberg, and it's easy to look at retrospectively and say, from that moment, she effectively set herself up for failure.
I mean, look, I think she set herself up for failure from day one because she took a job that, if American democracy holds, is going to be impossible for her to do. The fact that she was willing to she really helped bring the Epstein controversy to the fore during the campaign in the early years of the presidency. And then the administration realized it had written checks that they couldn't cash because one of the names that repeatedly appears is that of the president, Donald Trump. So, I mean, it's hard to muster sympathy for Pam Bondi for many reasons, but primarily because she dug her career's own grave here. She didn't have to amplify the Epstein files. She didn't have to say she was going to be able to prosecute and indict all the president's enemies. She could have played her cards a little closer to the vest. She could have been a little bit more strategic. In other words, she could have exhibited the qualities that lawyers are hired for in the first place. She chose instead to sacrifice her integrity for the sake of power, and now she has neither.
Carol, do you have a sense of what the reaction has been inside of DOJ?
You know, there's a large group of people who are still, as I describe in a couple of settings, holding on by their fingernails because they care deeply about the shared mission and values of the Department of Justice that they have long known and that Mike also worked under. And they are a little bit elated that Pam Bondi is gone, but full of apprehension about what this means for the next Attorney General. Because if Pam Bondi's version of bending a knee, bending the Department of Justice to the president's will, if her version isn't sufficient, how much worse will it get? You know, it is going to be, I love the way you phrase these questions, Alicia, because it is going to be nigh impossible to surpass the factual challenges that are necessary to indict and prosecute people without strong evidence, without evidence that's beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's hard to imagine how the next AG is going to jump that hurdle in a way that's different than Pam Bondi. But inside the department, there are people quite nervous about what the next Attorney General is going to have to be willing to do to meet Donald Trump's standard.
And Michael, given the almost symbiotic relationship between the FBI and the DOJ, what are you hearing from FBI officials?
My phone is blowing up with GIFs of children dancing in celebration and slightly more muted expressions of joy.
Indeed. Very quickly, before I let you go, Laura, your sense as the president and his inner circle put together this short list, how quickly we can expect this to move?
Well, right now, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, is in place, is acting for the interim. So it's hard to tell how quickly the president is going to move, but he has a number of people here who he has been close with for years and people who he is very fond of. He has created a soft landing for Bondi, similar to what he kind of did for Kristi Noem, because he also was fond of Bondi. But he is very close to Jeanine Pirro. He's very close to Alina Habba, his former personal attorney. These are people who are regularly either at the White House or Palm Beach. And so we know that they are definitely pitching him right now, as well as his aides close to him, for this potential position.
Alina Habba, truly the definition of if at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. Laura Barón-Lopez, Kara Lenig, thank you both so much for your reporting and your analysis. Michael Feinberg, you're going to come back with me a little later. When we come back, more on Pam Bondi's handling of the Epstein files. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren joins us on that and why no one was held accountable for those crimes. Plus, Todd Blanche running DOJ for now could look a lot like Pam Bondi running the DOJ. We're going to look at what changes are in store for the Justice Department with a new loyalist in charge. And later in the show, we're going to get to the war in Iran, Trump's message to the nation failing to impress just about anyone. All those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after this. Today, demanding that Pam Bondi still appear for her scheduled deposition on April 14th, despite her firing. It's worth a reminder of how things went the last time Bondi appeared before Congress under oath. Watch.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000. and the NASDAQ smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about.
Now, you'll recall that was her answer to a line of questioning on her handling of the Epstein files. I want to bring in Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She is a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, you were in that hearing we just played. Do you think that was the beginning of the end for Pam Bondi?
You know, it's hard to know with this president what's motivating him. She completely embarrassed herself. But, you know, it could be that she's failed to convict people without any cause, people who are his enemies. Certainly, the Epstein files have not been handled well. People across the country now believe that there may be a reason why President Trump is trying to hide the files when before people were giving him the benefit of the doubt. So this has been a bad situation for her and for the president, but I don't assume that her replacement will be something we'll cheer. I understand Todd Blanche is going to be filling in. He's the guy who went down and coddled Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving time for child abuse, moved her to a country club prison after the interview. So good riddance to Pam Bondi, but good luck to us for who might come next.
Well, let's talk about some of the other names that are circulating. You referenced Todd Blanche. We've also heard from our colleagues Lee Zeldin, Alina Habba, Jeanine Pirro. The question, of course, who on that list is actually confirmable? Is there someone here Republicans can get behind? None. Say more.
Not those names. I mean, Zeldin is violating the law constantly in his current position. He's been called out on it by myself and others in the Science Committee. Puro has been, you can indict a ham sandwich, but not Trump's political enemies. She's been a failure and an embarrassment. Habba got thrown out of court. I mean, these people are jokes. I mean, they cannot be confirmed, I would imagine.
Okay, let me throw one more name into the mix because there's reporting today that some senators are trying to pitch Donald Trump on replacing Bondi with Senator Mike Lee. It was posited to me that his Republican colleagues just want him out of the Senate so badly that they saw an opening and thought they could potentially position him. Do you think Mike Lee would make a good AG?
No. I mean, I've worked with Mike actually on some FISA reforms. So, you know, it's not somebody I can't talk to, but I don't think he would be a good AG. And I imagine that some of his fellow Republican senators might want to get rid of him. Whether he would take that deal, turn in a Senate seat where he probably could serve for the foreseeable future for a job that, you know, he could get fired in a few months by Trump. He's so volatile. So would he even take it? I wouldn't if I were him.
I'm stuck on something that my colleague Michael Feinberg, who served as a special agent at the FBI, said in our previous block, which was, here you have a president who is frustrated that Pam Bondi has not succeeded sufficiently, in his view, in bending the DOJ to his whims and to his will. Michael Feinberg's argument was that she didn't just bend it, she broke the institution that once was the Department of Justice. In your mind, what does accountability look like for Pam Bondi, even as she returns to being a private citizen?
Well, she has to come to Congress. She's been subpoenaed, and the fact that she's been fired doesn't excuse her from complying with that subpoena. She has information that the Congress needs to get about the Epstein files. Whether she will escape Bar Association accountability, it's hard to say. A number of Trump defenders who are lawyers lost their bar licenses. I don't know if there's anything going on in that regard relative to her, but certainly some of her conduct as AG might lead to questions about her ethics and her ability to adequately serve as an officer of the court.
I'm just so struck that if you read the reporting, it seems as though the president's biggest critique or frustration was her inability to prosecute his perceived enemies. But from your vantage point, how much damage did she actually do? Even if she didn't succeed, even if there wasn't a home run, simply the time, the money, the pain, the damage to our democratic institution that has been inflicted. How are you going to look back on her tenure?
That was the point, I think, to try and harm people who the president doesn't like and who he considers his enemies, whether or not they hadn't committed crimes, any of them, which is why the effort to indict them failed miserably. Obviously, if you are a defendant in a matter, it costs money, it's aggravating. I think in some cases, it may end up helping people. They're now going after my colleague, Eric Swalwell, who is running for governor of California. And I think, since they've singled him out as the biggest enemy of Trump, that probably helps Eric in California. People are wondering who among the Democrats they should vote for. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, if Trump is against him that much, he must be our guy.
It's a truly remarkable day in a truly remarkable moment in American history. And Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, I am so grateful to you for making time today to be with us. Thank you. After the break, reaction from some of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse to Pam Bondi's firing. Why the calls for accountability are still out there.
To hear her not answer questions. I mean, basically, she's just evading every question. At one point, she talked about what is Jekyll and Hyde, like anything that she can do to eat up the time and anything she can do to not even humanize survivors. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway for a lot of us. She won't even turn around and acknowledge us as people. And she won't even look at us after we have gone through so much and the DOJ has failed time and time again. It is just such a grave miscarriage of justice.
One of the most shameful parts of Pam Bondi's tenure, her callousness towards the women who survived Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. A survivor, Danielle Bensky, noted Bondi, who repeatedly claimed the Epstein client list was on her desk, refused to meet with or even look at the survivors. Her ousting, however, is unlikely to provide the justice that these women have fought so tirelessly for, as Todd Blanche, who cut a sweetheart deal with Ghislaine Maxwell, becomes acting AG. Joining me now, senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, and Michael Feinberg is back with us. I have a sort of technical question for you, Lisa, which is when an AG steps out, whether in this case an ousting or whether of their own volition, how does something like an investigation or the release of the Epstein files get handed over?
Well, if you listen to the Department of Justice, whether it's AG Bondi or the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, they will tell you, Alicia, that this is behind them, that they have produced all of the files that they were going to produce in response to the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So from their perspective, there is nothing more to hand off. There's, of course, the open question about whether former Attorney General Pam Bondi or anyone else from the Department of Justice will go to talk to the House Oversight Committee, which has an outstanding subpoena for her testimony. Earlier today, Congresswoman Mace saying that subpoena is to Pam Bondi in her personal capacity. It's not to the Attorney General of the United States. It names her specifically, and according to Nancy Mace, she still wants to hear from Pam Bondi, looking back retrospectively. How did we get to a place where so many survivors' names and other personally identifying information was splashed across the public domain? I mean, even last week, we saw one survivor file a class action against Google. Why Google? Because they say that they've made repeated attempts to ask Google to de-index their name, to take it out of search. Why is it in search in the first place? Because it was released through the release of documents in the Epstein files. So you can see that the harms for survivors continue to reverberate well beyond the initial release of these documents. And I think for reasons like that, Pam Bondi is continuing to be a subject of focus for survivors and people who consider themselves survivors' allies, like Congresswoman Mace.
Well, and that question you posit about the subpoena is one we're going to be talking about in our next block with a member of the House Oversight Committee. There's the substance, and then there is the tone and the way in which she has spoken to these survivors or spoken about these survivors. Let's take a listen to some of that, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
If you are willing, please raise your hands if you have still not been able to meet with this department.